We all know the Nobel Prize, right? It's the absolute peak, the highest honor for people who have given the greatest benefit on mankind. But what if I told you that this whole incredible legacy of peace, of literature, of science, was basically born from a typo, from a case of mistaken identity and a shocking obituary for a man the world called the Merchant of Death? Yeah, let's get into this wild story.
So, our story doesn't start with a fancy ceremony. It starts with a public takedown, all thanks to a French newspaper back in 1888.
I mean, can you imagine waking up and reading your own obituary? That is literally what happened to Alfred Nobel. The paper got him mixed up with his brother Ludwig, who had just died. And the headline read, "The Merchant of Death is dead," and went on to just rip him apart, saying he became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before. Reading those words about himself is what's believed to have completely changed everything, forcing him to think about what his legacy would really be.
And that, right there, is the central paradox we're going to unravel. How on earth does this guy, the one vilified for creating weapons, become the architect of the world's most famous prize for peace and progress? Well, the answer is a lot more complicated than you might think. It's not just about a guilty conscience.
See, to really get the prize, you have to understand the man. And Alfred Nobel, well, he was a walking contradiction.
So this is the man himself, Alfred Nobel. He was an absolutely brilliant chemist, engineer, and businessman. And the scale of his work, it was just immense. He wasn't just the inventor of dynamite. We're talking 355 patents and a global empire with factories in over 90 countries. Make no mistake, he was one of the richest and most powerful men of the entire 19th century.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. You have this deep conflict running through his whole life. On one hand, you've got the industrialist, the guy who invented dynamite, created smokeless gunpowder, and owned a massive arms factory. But on the other hand, you have the idealist, a lifelong pacifist, a political radical who actually called himself a social democrat and a huge fan of poetry, especially the pacifist writings of Percy Shelley.
You know, when you read his personal letters, you don't see some ruthless arms dealer. You see a reclusive and, honestly, a kind of sad genius. He was lonely, always in poor health, and he hated high society. But he also spoke 5 languages fluently and had a deep, deep love for literature and the arts. He was so much more than that terrible caricature in the newspaper.
So, with this really complex guy in mind, what was the actual inspiration? What pushed him to create a prize for all of humanity?
You have to remember the world Nobel was living in. It was just an era of constant, absolutely brutal warfare. The Crimean War, the American Civil War, the Franco-Prussian War. These weren't just headlines in a history book for him. This was the background noise of his entire life, and it fueled this deep hatred he had for conflict. And here's the crucial thing. His pacifism wasn't some late-life PR move to clean up his image. Not at all. We know from his letters he was interested in peace even as a young man. In one he wrote, "The more I hear of the thunder of the cannon, the more blood I see shed, the more alive and intensive becomes this dream of mine for a world without war."
Now, this quote is where his thinking gets really controversial. He said this to his friend, the famous pacifist Bertha von Suttner. Nobel basically argued for deterrence. He thought that if he could just create a weapon so terrifyingly powerful, so destructive that it could wipe out entire armies in a second, the nations would be forced to give up war for good. It's a shocking idea, but he was essentially describing the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, long before the nuclear age even gave it a name.
So this combination of idealism and, let's call it hard-nosed pragmatism, it all got poured into his final will and testament. And let me tell you, this document was absolutely revolutionary for its time.
Okay, just let this number sink in for a minute. 94%. Nobel left almost his entire mind-bogglingly huge fortune to fund these prizes. He gave only a tiny fraction to his relatives. This was an act of just almost unimaginable commitment to his idea. And the ideas inside that were even more radical. Think about it. At a time when nationalism was at its absolute peak in Europe, Nobel demanded that his prizes completely ignore nationality. They were supposed to go to the most worthy person, period, whether he be a Scandinavian or not. And he created a prize specifically for fraternity between nations, which was a direct slap in the face to the politics of the era. And then there was this little detail, which was actually a huge political bombshell. He insisted the Peace Prize be awarded by a committee from Norway. Now, at the time, Norway was stuck in this really tense union with Sweden and was fighting for its independence. So giving this incredibly prestigious job to the Norwegians,
It was seen as a total provocation, a direct insult to the Swedish establishment and to King Oscar II, who was, let's just say, not happy about it. So you'd think, okay, we'll sign, story over, right? Nope, not even close. Nobel's death in 1896 was just the start of a 5-year-long battle to even make his vision happen.
That will was nearly broken. I mean, first up, some of his relatives contested it, hoping to get a bigger chunk of the inheritance. Then you had the king, Oscar II, who was furious about what he called an unpatriotic will. And on top of all that, because Nobel wrote the will himself without a lawyer, it was full of legal holes and bureaucratic nightmares. But through it all, his two hand-picked executors, Ragnar Solman and Rudolf Liljequist, just refused to give up. And so, 5 very long years after he died, the first ever Nobel Prizes were finally awarded on December 10, 1901.
And from that messy 5-year fight, the Nobel Prize became this: a global symbol for the highest achievements of humanity, celebrated with royalty at one of the most prestigious events in the world. It's an incredible legacy, for sure, but it leaves us with one last, really important question. Over 120 years later, is the prize that we have today what Alfred Nobel actually wanted?
Because as amazing as the prize is, it's not without its modern critics. For example, science today is all about huge teams, but the prize can only go to 3 people, which often leaves out key contributors. Nobel's will also said the prize should be for work in the preceding year, but now it often goes to discoveries made decades ago. And of course, there are the famous omissions. How did Mahatma Gandhi never win the Peace Prize? And then there are the really contentious awards given to people involved in wars, sparking huge debates. So in the end, the paradox is still alive and well. A prize funded by an arms manufacturer has become the world's symbol for peace. And it keeps evolving, keeps sparking arguments, and keeps forcing us to ask that same question at its very core. What does it really mean to give the greatest benefit to humankind?